Welcome. My name is Simone Turek Lee. I'm with John Burton Advocates for Youth. Happy to have everyone here this morning for the webinar. We're going to talk today about the foster youth tax credit and filing taxes for post-secondary education students who have been in foster care or are currently in foster care. I'm joined today by some wonderful colleagues that I'll introduce in just a moment. And let's first just go over the agenda. So we'll do introductions, we'll do a little icebreaker, and we'll first just talk a little bit about why young people should file taxes that have been in foster care, why college students should be filing taxes, and also provide an overview of the foster youth tax credit, which is now 3 years old, still a toddler, and some other common credits that young people often receive. We'll talk a little bit about foster youth tax credit implementation progress over the last couple of years, and then how college campus personnel, this is really the meat of the webinar, right? How college campus personnel can support foster youth students to file their taxes. There's a bunch of fun things you can do that we'll talk about. And then what happens after you file and how you can help in that sort of period of time. Then we'll jump into questions. So we have a questions and answer box. As you all know, I think we're all pretty seasoned with Zoom now, 2025, been doing it for a few years. But if you have any technical difficulties, please do chat us. The questions box is there for you to enter questions that'll be answered at the end of the webinar, but we will on occasion answer some questions directly, but we will try to save several of them for that Q&A at the end to answer verbally. We are recording this Zoom webinar. We are also going to make the recording and the slides available to all of you, along with all of the resources we mentioned after the webinar, probably later this afternoon. So it'll be sent to everyone who registered for the webinar. All right. So I'm going to take a moment to introduce, I'll just reintroduce myself. I'm Simone Turek Lee. I'm the Director of Housing and Economic Mobility here at John Burton Advocates for Youth. I think many of you on the webinar are acquainted with some of my colleagues on our education team. And so we work really closely together and want to make this information available to you in the same way that we've worked with a lot of you on more strictly education-focused topics. And so we're thrilled to have you today on this webinar to talk about the foster youth tax credit. First, I'd like to introduce Cody Van Felden, and I'll pass it to Cody to introduce herself.
Thank you, Simone. Hi, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I am Cody Van Felden. I am the project associate at John Burton Advocates for Youth. I recently just started last October, but I'm here in a capacity. I have worn many different hats in the past, including I've been a student recipient of 2 different GSP programs at the California Community College level, as well as the CSU level. I've also worked for both of those college campuses support programs for the GSP programs. And then I've also been a VITA volunteer, specifically helping foster youth claim the foster youth tax credit, I believe as a VITA volunteer 2 years ago. And then I also have utilized VITA services myself and have supported in past self-filing events that JBay has hosted. So I'm here with a very unique perspective and really excited to be able to share all of this information with you guys. And I can go ahead and pass it to Carla.
Thanks, Cody. Hello, everyone. My name is Carla Macias, and I'm a consultant with John Burton. My LLC is Foster Advantage Consulting. I previously was with Santa Clara County for 23 years. Santa Clara County was the first piloted VITA site for foster youth. We sort of started this from the beginning. I've been a VITA volunteer now since 2021, and I've been a consultant with JBay on the Foster Youth Tax Project since September 2022. I'll pass it over to Gabrielle.
Thanks, Carla. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gabrielle Ridley, and I'm a consultant for JBay as well as a professional speaker and trainer on trauma-informed education and best practices for system and trauma-impacted students. Like Cody, I've worn many hats, including I was the coordinator for the Guardian Scholars and Next Up programs at Orange Coast College for many years. I'm also a foster and adoptive parent, and I've helped one of my children navigate the tax filing process for the last several years. And so that is some of the experience that I bring to this work. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Simone.
Thank you. As you can see, we've got a great team here today. I know you're acquainted with some of these folks already, and we're excited to jump into the webinar. All right, so we're going to do a fun little icebreaker, something that we often do with young people if we do a workshop on taxes, right? Something that I imagine if all of you were doing a workshop, you might have a similar icebreaker, but we always think it's fun to do this for practitioners and administrators and those that are you know, assisting young people. So what's the first word that comes to mind when you think about filing your taxes? So this is something that most or all of us have to do. All of us have to do it probably at some point in life. So we all have different feelings and, you know, emotions that that come to play when we think about filing taxes. As I'm saying this, I'm realizing that as you chat, it may only be going to hosts and panelists, but that's okay because I will repeat it out as people say it, as people chat it. Money, great. Ugh, if that's a word, yes, we got it. Stress, great. Paying back taxes, daunting, W-2s, documents, again. Yeah, so this is very familiar, very similar to what we hear from others. Fun time, okay, I like that one. So for a lot of people, filing taxes stresses you out for a lot of different reasons. We do it once a year, so it's not something we're super in the habit of doing. We forget it just enough before we have to do it next year. Often it feels complicated, it feels intimidating, and we worry about losing money, right? Or we worry about missing money that we might be owed. And we worry about getting in trouble. What if we do something wrong? Well, as I'm sure all of you, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I'm sure as all of you can imagine, it's doubly daunting for a young person who's never done it and who has not had guidance on that. And so this is why we feel it's really important to equip the sector with resources and information to support young people with doing this. Even if they're not required to file taxes currently, at some point it's something they will have to do. And why not get them the support and information they need now while they're connected to a system or a school or supportive adults before they're sort of more on their own and they end up having to say go to like a paid preparer, right? Who could be great or could not be great, right? We want them to go in places where they trust and where there's trusted messengers with information. So with that, I'm going to turn us to the next slide. And this is a poll. I'm going to launch the poll, but we want to know, we're going to ask this question now. We're going to ask this question at the end of the webinar to just get a grip on how much information people are retaining and how confident people are feeling after this webinar with assisting young people with their taxes. We also want to know right now how you're coming into us. Is this something that you feel really confident about assisting young people, or do you feel like you're kind of, you know, at square one and needing a lot of information? So I'm going to launch this poll and have you all respond that way. So it should be showing up for folks. Great. So there's some 4s and some 3s. There's a few 0s, some 1s. All over the place, which is great. We've got a real mixed group here in terms of where people are in having this information. I'm going to give it about 5 more seconds and then we'll end the poll. All right. So as you can see, we are all over the map here, which is great. And we've even got some 10s and 8s, 9s, and 10s, which is great. We've got some seasoned folks that can chime in. And we've got folks who are sort of at square one, and that's great too. We're going to get you further along. All right. So moving on, let's jump into content. So why should current and former foster youth file their taxes? So this is something, now we're not saying every young person should always file their taxes. It's not 100%. But you'll see from some of the numbers we share why we are working on this project. JBay has been working on the Foster Youth Tax Project for a number of years now. And the main purpose of it at this point is really centered around the new foster youth tax credit. But again, this is something that all young people are going to have to do someday. And right now, because of the foster youth tax credit, it's something that can be a source of income for them. So let's look at some of the details. So the primary reason is young people, if they're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, et cetera, you're not making a bunch of money right now. When you're a young adult, you're not further along in your career to where your income is super high, right? Also, you all are working with students. Often students may not be working at all, right? So we know that income is a challenge, and this can be a source of income. If you look at the blue box in 2024, young people from foster care between 18 and 25 who filed with one of our Project VITA sites received from total, all their total tax return. Single filers received an average of $1,370 back, and parenting filers, those who were head of household, custodial parents, received $5,265 back on average, which is significant, right? And it really is increasing young people's income fairly significantly because their income tends to be really low at that age. So that's one thing. Other reasons that I've sort of already mentioned a bit is, it's an important independent living skill, right? But tax filing is also how you access federal or state relief, right? This is maybe way more relevant during the pandemic. It was a big talking point during the pandemic, but we don't know, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know when relief is going to come and it's going to be needed in our country or in our state. We can see right now from the wildfires that, things do happen and they are happening. And so, being able to receive government relief is important. Tax filing is how you access that relief. 60% of the young people that came to one of the Project VITA sites during the pandemic had missed the stimulus payments, the pandemic stimulus payments, simply because they had not filed taxes, right? So this is one way to access that benefit. Filing also establishes income for public benefits. Tax refunds are not counted against eligibility, which is great, and it establishes a documented documentation of your income so that you can then much more easy to apply for public benefits. And then lastly, it often uncovers identity theft and tax fraud that young people are victims of. So as we all know, identity theft is more common among young people that have been in foster care. And we've learned from foster youth filing at our VITA sites that a higher percentage are definitely, victims of tax fraud, where someone is either claiming them as a dependent erroneously or even has used their social security number for something. So it's an important way to uncover those situations. And then, like I said, an important independent living skill. So a quick overview, this training is not intended to be let's make sure everyone knows about every tax credit that's out there and memorize all the information, because you're not probably going to be helping young people literally. You're not going to be going through and filling out their forms for them, right? In most cases, but you do need to have a general awareness of what is possibly available. And so that's why we just want to share information certainly about the foster youth tax credit and about other tax credits. So the foster youth tax credit is the first ever tax credit for foster youth in the nation. Really exciting. We proposed this as an idea in 2021. And fortunately, Governor Gavin Newsom and State Controller Betty Yee and Senator Caballero and the legislature were very welcoming of this idea. The governor put it in his January budget, and the rest is history. My light just went off here. The first year that the tax credit became available that you could file and receive it was in 2023. It was established in 2022, and it's administered by the California Franchise Tax Board in partnership with the California Department of Social Services, who verifies eligibility. In 2025, the tax credit will provide up to $1,154. So it started out a little over $1,000. Each year it gets a little bump. as the tax credits do. And, so it increases every year. Where it is now is $1,154. So youth who are eligible, this is obviously pretty important to know. Youth who are eligible must file their 2024 state tax return. They can also file previous tax returns if they've missed it. They had to have been between the ages of 18 and 25, so not yet turned 26 on the last day of the tax year. So for filing this coming tax season, that would be on December 31st, 2024. If you're filing back years, it would be the last day of the year for the tax year you're filing. This is a program of the California Earned Income Tax Credit, the Cal EITC, which means you have to have earned income, but you just have to have earned $1. So even if you've had a very temporary job where you just earned very little, you are still eligible. There is an earning maximum, right? So this is intended for low income tax filers. So you have to have earned between $1 and $31,950 during the tax year. So in 2024, and that includes informal work. It does not have to be like a job where you fill out a W-4. That's not necessarily what it is, right? It can be self-employment. Also, I understand that there even more informal work is eligible, like cash payment. It is a little bit harder to prove, but it is a possibility. And then you have to have lived in California for at least half of 2024, and then have a social security number or an individual tax identification number, an ITIN. So the big things to remember here are sort of the age range, have to have been, I think I may have skipped this bullet, you have to have been in foster care on or after your 13th birthday. So all of you are probably familiar with these different eligibility parameters with financial aid and other things, with campus support programs where some things require you have to been in care at a certain time. So this tax credit requires you to have been in care on or after your 13th birthday, very similar to the eligibility for Next Step, right? All right. So where are we with foster youth tax credit implementation? As of last year, as of last tax season this year, we're in 2025. As of last year, 5,693 youth received the foster youth tax credit. So what does this really mean? Where does this put us? So this is a 16% increase from 2023, which is fantastic. But it is just 16% of the estimated eligible population. Now, that may sound really low. It's maybe not as low as you think. Tax credits never have 100% uptake, and the state ones are particularly lower than the federal, but this is low. We want this to increase. For year 3, this is not terrible, especially for a very niche small population that is not required to file their taxes generally. So I don't want to bash us and bash the progress, but I do think we can do a whole lot better here. What about money? So like I said, young people are receiving up to a little more than $1,000 for the tax credit. You can see again on the right the amounts that they are receiving back from their filing in total, because there's other tax credits they might receive. And that means collectively they received about $6.1 million from the foster youth tax credit alone. And when you factor in other tax credits, it jumps to well above $9 million. These are examples of some of the other tax credits that young people often receive. There's, like I mentioned, the Cal EITC, there's the Young Child Tax Credit, and these are on the state side in the blue box for people who are parenting. There's also the Child Independent Care Expenses Credit and the Renter's Credit. On the federal side, we've got the Federal Earned Income Tax Credit and the Federal Child Tax Credit and the Child Care Credit. And then we also have 2 credits that are for students, for a lot of the young people that you're serving. And just to clarify, the credits with the asterisks are not refundable. They'll just reduce what you owe if you owe anything. The refundable tax credits, like the foster youth tax credit, will actually provide money back. You can see that rates of foster youth tax credit receipt really vary by county. You don't see all the counties here because for the 24 counties that have less than 11 youth that claimed the credit, the rates can't be calculated because exact figures weren't provided because they mask that data. But this is for any county that had more than 11 youth claiming the foster youth tax credit. You can see sort of the eligible population in that county estimated, this is the percent that claim. So you can see some counties are up, you know, beyond 20% and some are on the lower side. But you can, you know, you might be trying to look for your county here and see where you are. Okay, if you want to learn more about foster youth tax credit implementation, you can download that report. It has a ton of information, and we're also, you know, always welcome questions about implementation. And I just put that link in the chat. All right, and I'll just say one more time that we are recording this. We will send out slides and recording later this afternoon. Okay. So now I'm going to turn it over to Gabrielle, and we are going to talk a little bit about how campus personnel can support foster youth students to file their taxes.
Simone. So much of the rest of this presentation is going to really dive deeply into the what and the how of doing this work. And for just a few minutes here, I'd like to talk about the why. And I know that we've got everyone who's here now is already kind of on board with the why, but we can get into it a little bit more. You can go to the next slide, Simone. So as you know, right, we are in a unique position with our students, pretty much all of whom are eligible for the foster youth tax credit. As the folks who are doing this work, we've got a lot on our plates. And I think when it comes to things like this, sometimes the mentality is sort of like, I can't do another thing. I'm even persuaded that this is good and worthwhile. I literally cannot do another thing. I'm too busy. And for many of us, our focus is on academics. And we recognize that as we're serving system and trauma impacted students, there's a lot that goes into their academic success. And I think that we all understand that financial stability, these independent living skills, financial literacy, these all contribute not only to their personal and academic success, but really lifelong wellness. And we are in a unique position to be able to support them with that. And so the how can look different depending on where we're at. I know I was looking at some of the guests in attendance. We've got folks who've hosted tax filing workshops before. We've got folks who've been doing this work for a long time. We've also got folks in the room who are pretty new to this work. And that's wonderful. I think we saw some of that reflected in the poll at the beginning as well with folks' knowledge. And what I want to say is the great thing is, as much as you do, that's more than zero. That's moving the needle and that's helping students. And so if you help spread the word by sharing some of the outreach materials and the informative materials that JBay has put together, fantastic. You are equipping your students with knowledge that's going to help them take a step in the right direction. If you've got the capacity to host self-filing workshops or tax filing workshops in partnership with VITA or other organizations, phenomenal. One thing we know is that really is a best practice because we've got our students right then and there, and we can offer different incentives or motivators for them to show up. But really the most valuable thing that we have is those trusting relationships. One thing that we've seen from doing the work is that it doesn't matter how many emails someone sends. It doesn't matter the social media campaigns. What they care about is the information coming from a trusted source and a trusted source that they believe cares from them. And so when we've got them in our offices, when we've got them in our drop-in centers, and we have the opportunity to look them in the eye, call them by their name, share a warm smile, and say, hey, this really would be good for you, and this is coming from someone who cares, that's where we have the opportunity. And I can say, you know, from my own personal work with students, I let them know I'm going to be a stalker. I'm going to be a stalker because I care. And if I'm hosting, you know, one of these workshops, or we're just going to have it drop in hours, and I'm going to tap 2 of my student workers, equip them with the JBay information so they're on hand to help if someone gets stuck or has questions. Anytime someone comes in, I'm going to point them. I'm going to point them to a Cody and say, Cody's here to help. Have you done your taxes yet? Sit down. Let's get it together. Let's take a look at the checklist. Do you need some help gathering your documents? And of course, the rest of the team is going to talk more about those. But I really just want to kind of encourage us all to remember family privilege as a concept. And if that's not a concept you're familiar with, I do encourage you to look into it. But to talk about it briefly, it's just the privileges that someone enjoys through life, unearned really, by having a stable family. And stable families can look different. But the reality is, for the majority of the students that we serve in Next Step and Guardian Scholars type programs, our students lack family privilege. They lack someone who's in that role to say, hey, have you done your taxes yet? That's a good and worthwhile thing to do. And it's money in your pocket. And I'm here to help. I know it's scary and it's overwhelming. And so as the folks who work in these programs, we are in that unique position to help bridge the gap from the lack of family privilege and to really make this difference. And so again, I want to acknowledge, I know our plates are very full and I know the work is very hard, and this is an extra thing. And it's an extra thing that really is worthwhile, and it really does make a difference for our students, both now and in the long term. And with that, I'll pass it back.
Gabrielle, appreciate that. And just sort of to build on what Gabrielle shared, there are a range of ways to help. You don't have to become a VITA volunteer, right? Like Cody and Carla. Not everybody has to do that. Everybody has a role to play. And so you can see there's a continuum of options. Even if you're conducting outreach, and that's the one thing you do, that is huge. Outreach is huge. Educating young people about the existence of this credit and how they can file and how to get connected with resources. Those referrals are really, really valuable. So you can conduct outreach, you can educate young people, you can help them prepare, as Gabrielle mentioned, and then you can help them get connected to actually file through a VITA site, which we'll talk about in just a second, or through self-filing. I'm going to put, I realized that the chat was only going to hosts and panelists, so I will put the report in there again, and then I will also put just the slide, the link on the slide, which goes to all of our resources on tax filing. That is like the mother page of all of our tax filing resources. So next we are going to kind of go over the how for all of these things, right? So first, let's just touch on outreach. Here are some pretty, straightforward materials. Flyers. So we've got on the left, we've got FTB, the Franchise Tax Board, makes kind of more general flyers available for a lot of their credits. So they have the Cali ITC flyers, the Foster Youth Tax Credit flyers, the Young Child Tax Credit flyers, and those are available for free. You can order hard copies of them or of posters that you could put up in your office. I strongly encourage it. And you can do that at that link there. The image, just to not confuse anyone, because I know you're like, that says 1,117, not 1,154. The image is the image from last year, but the actual flyers that you're ordering are for this year. I couldn't seem to get my hands on the new image, and I didn't want it to be blank on the screen, so I left that in there. But they are new flyers and new posters, and you can order them there. You can also download JBay's flyer on the Foster Youth Tax Credit, which has sort of links to very specific things, like how to, that, I don't know if it's too small on your screen, but that link that's spelled out at the bottom of the page or at the bottom of the flyer goes to a youth-facing page on our website that has sort of the need to know information for young people. So not like the full Monty of things that you see on the link I put in the chat, but sort of a very youth-facing page. The QR code also goes there. And that page will also provide links to how they can get support to file. So this if you're going to do flyers, I sort of recommend our flyer because it has link to very specific assistance for young people in foster care. If you want posters, get the FTB posters. Lastly, we have a social media toolkit or a social media guide. I don't know what constitutes an actual toolkit. I might be using the wrong terminology here, but it is a bunch of social media images with text next to them that you can post. Cody put it together. They are timed throughout the year. So we've got a cute Valentine's Day one and a St. Patrick's Day one. And, so they're timed throughout the year between now and I want to say October, Cody, does that sound right? So please start posting if you're active on social media. Your campus support program has young people following it. Start posting. We got posts for you. So I will work on putting those in the chat. And then in the meantime, I am going to pass it over to Cody because we are now going to talk about a very cool, exciting curriculum that we've developed that we hope you guys pick up and use.
Thank you, Simone. And yes, as she said, we have recently started developing this curriculum for you all to utilize. I do want to note it's not finalized yet. It should be in the next couple days for you guys to utilize this curriculum, but we're super excited about it. And I want to point out, you do not have to be a tax expert to deliver this curriculum. This is ideally, we want folks to be able to get this education out to as many foster youth as possible. We want this to be a positive experience. So you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to know all the questions or answers to all the questions, because in my experience, there is a lot of specific questions, which is why it's very helpful to have partners at Vitus sites and just folks that you can reach out to identify answers to the questions that you get from your students. And then, sorry, chat's wanting to take over my screen. And then this resource has also been vetted by young people. So we've done a test run with this curriculum. We really want it to be the best it can be for the students once you start to utilize this curriculum. And then it also includes engagement activities such as quizzes, polls, and discussion questions. And for example, this can be really beneficial if you know your type of students. For example, if you have a group of students that you know is really engaging, really likes to have conversations, you can mold this curriculum to fit your audience. So if you know they like to have conversations, maybe add in a little bit more discussion questions, set aside time for that to just get your students talking about taxes and what that process looks like. And then if you have the opposite, where you know your group of students are more on the side of just kind of absorbing all the information, wanting to ask some questions, you could utilize polls or quizzes, utilize the chat if it's virtual. Because I've also seen what happens when you get that group of students who don't want to talk and you put them on the spot. So this curriculum is really designed for you to be able to mold it to the type of students that you have in these workshops. And then the topics that are included are: what are taxes, why should I file, and when? What are tax credits? How do I prepare to file my taxes? How do the students actually file when it is that time? And then what happens after they file their taxes. So when setting up these sessions, it's important to think about the best time to host the sessions. You'll see in another slide, we recommend splitting this up into 2 different sessions. But for example, like these first 3 bullets is really the before tax season comes up, thinking about what documents do I need to get, what receipts do I need to gather. So like, for example, doing that in November, December, getting the students thinking, because they often go on winter break. So a lot of them are kind of stuck thinking about that, seeing all the social media posts of tax seasons coming up. What does that mean for me? But having that workshop before they go into winter break can have them start thinking about that. If they start getting things in the mail, they'll know what to expect. And then when students come back in January, February, host a second workshop that goes into how do they actually file their taxes, and then what happens afterwards. So that's just a suggestion from being a student, kind of going through this process myself. Next slide, please. And then, yeah, so as I said, we definitely suggest doing this into 2 different sections, each about an hour long. There is 38 slides total. And we also can recommend, if you have the capability, to add in a 3rd session with partnership of a Vitus site, to where you can bring in volunteers to help one-on-one with your students or do like a workshop. Just dedicated to that specifically would be really good for students as well. And then this curriculum is designed to both be done virtually or in person. In person, that would require you to have Wi-Fi and PowerPoint capability. If you are planning on doing it in person, we recommend having food or prizes just to kind of make sure they're not hungry. It's welcome space, but also prizes is always a good and fun way to get them engaged, excited about this. I know from personal experience, taxes has always been a very scary thing for foster youth. I've never liked filing my taxes, but since I've been involved with this project, I'm getting more of a positive experience and perception of filing my taxes. So we really want that environment to be what the students are feeling when they're going into these workshops and when they leave the workshop. And then virtually, we recommend setting up the polls and quizzes ahead of time, either in an app or if you have the link, have that ready, have QR codes ready so they can scan it if they're on their computer and they have access to their phone. And then definitely have breakout rooms ready. So this just allows you for students, if they have specific questions, they have some privacy to talk one-on-one with somebody, and to just give each student that time that they may need to kind of dive into their situation. Because as many of you may know, foster youth students, we all have a very unique situation. It's not the same across the board. So breakout rooms really helps keep that privacy for them. And then we also recommend having at least 2 staff members. So this will just help mitigate if there's any questions, if someone needs to pop out while the general session is happening, you have that support. And then we also recommend to review the trainer's guide and slide deck ahead of time. If you do have an in-person session, do print out any of the items that you may need. We'll dive into a little bit about one of the resources they have, so a tax prep checklist. You might want to print that out for students ahead of time. If you, depending on the activity you use, if you need something printed out for that, definitely have that ready to go for any in-person workshops that you have. And then as Simone mentioned, there's the link as well at the bottom. But as I said, this should be available in a couple days for this curriculum so you guys can all utilize it. Next slide.
Cody, before we
Yes.
jump into the tax prep checklist, I just want to, something came up when you were talking, I thought of, and we should also say all of the information that Cody's mentioning, this is in the trainer's guide. So don't feel like you're having to figure this all out right now. There's a very detailed trainer's guide that'll be available later this week. The PowerPoint's available now. But we would love feedback on this. If you deliver this curriculum and it goes well, we want to know. If you deliver this curriculum and it doesn't go well, we want to know. We've vetted it with young people, we've delivered ourselves, but everyone has different experience and we're also really familiar with the content. So we want to hear from you and hear how approachable this is. This is a new resource and we're very open to feedback, and we plan on sort of updating this for next year too. So please drop us a line and give us some honest feedback on it. There's a lot of information in there. If you feel like it's too much, tell us. If you feel like there's information that's not included, tell us. If young people have feedback, let us know. So I just wanted to say that we're really open to hearing that feedback. Okay, sorry, Cody, go ahead.
Thank you, Simone. Next slide. And then, yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, this is our tax prep checklist, which has also been vetted by young people. We wanted it to be very friendly for the uses for students using this for foster youth. It goes in a lot of in-depth information. So the bullets on this list is just some of the items. I'm not going to go too in-depth them, but there was just a few things I wanted to kind of point out, so you guys can get a feel of what's on this tax prep checklist. So it starts off just from their IDs and addresses that they would need to have on hand when they're filing their taxes. It also goes into, if they don't have a permanent address, options that they could utilize on where they would be able to receive mail at, if they decide for a check refund. And then it also goes over just each step of how they would obtain the documents, as well as with the foster youth tax credit. Verification is not required, but if a student has a preference, they want to obtain their verification letter, it gives the name, the contact information on how to be able to obtain that verification letter. And then another important piece I wanted to mention is it dives more into financial aid. So you all are college campus partners. So with students, financial aid is a big piece of filing taxes. And it dives into the qualified expenses. I know we had a question earlier about that. So it'll dive in a little bit about what those qualified expenses look like. Make sure you have all of those receipts for those qualified expenses. And I think we're going over a little bit more of that financial aid later in the presentation. But I utilize this every year to make sure I'm not missing anything. It's been like my favorite resource. And I definitely send it to any of my peers as well. It's very student friendly, gives all the information you could possibly need to make sure you're prepared for filing your taxes. But yeah, that's it for me. Am I passing it back to you, Simone?
Yeah, thank you, Cody. All right. And I should say, you know, you're going to hear me in a moment say, this is available, this isn't yet available. You know, we're in a funny place where tax season is about to launch. And so we have this sort of hurry up and wait challenge with these tax materials, where first you have to wait for the new tax credit amounts to come out. Then you have to wait for tax season to launch, but we don't want to wait until tax season launches to get everybody information, because then it's sort of like you're behind on starting outreach. And so we're in this weird time where we're saying, here's all these resources, but some of them, if you click on the link, they're not quite available. And that just has to do with the timing of tax season. So don't get discouraged. We're giving you all the links now. The links will be the same. And within like days or possibly a couple weeks for tax season launching, you know, we'll make these available. So just, I wanted to just sort of say that's why you're hearing like, this is available now, this isn't available now. The tax prep checklist is absolutely available now. But I'm sort of saying that in preparation for what I'm about to share with you here. So let's talk a little bit about how students file. So we've talked about prep, we've talked about you know, resources. How do they literally go file? What are people doing to file? So people are self-filing, or people are filing with what's called, and you've heard VITA a lot. And if you're not familiar with VITA, you're probably like, what are you talking about? VITA is a volunteer income tax assistance site. And then some people file with a paid preparer. So those are generally the three ways people file. Now, let's look at each one of those in more depth. Self-filing online is free to, if you are within a certain income, you can self-file online for free. And, you know, that is what most young people are doing. I shouldn't say that most are filing for free. Most are self-filing. Self-filing includes TurboTax and those other, you know, programs as well. But it can include a free online option. And so 81% of young people self-file. We encourage them to file for free. Some young people are filing with a VITA site. Now, we'll talk more about this later, but there are some special VITA sites for foster youth. And because of the existence of those, that's at 11%. If we didn't have those sites, that would be certainly not at 11%. You have paid preparers, which we do not recommend for a number of reasons I'll go into later. About 8% of youth are filing with a paid preparer. And when I say of youth, this is of young people who receive the foster youth tax credit. So this is like that population that received the credit. So let's first talk about VITA sites. So VITA sites provide free one-on-one tax preparation. They're just like paid preparers. If you've gone to a, you know, like, I don't know, H&R Block or Liberty Tax or whatever some of those are, right? And you sit with your tax preparer and they file your taxes on your behalf. That's what VITA sites do, but they do it for free and they're better at it. The reality is the data show that paid preparers frequently make mistakes. VITA volunteers rarely, compared to the paid preparers. So I know some people might be like, well, you get what you pay for in life, right? If I'm going to a free service, is it going to be good? In this case, it is likely that it will be better than what you get from a paid preparer. It's just what it is. It's just what the data says. So, and I love that. I love that there's quality services out there for free, right? And so VITA is available across the nation. This is something that the IRS sets up. It's the IRS's, you know, strategy for assisting low-income taxpayers. The kind of wild thing about it is it's all done on the backs of volunteers. So these VITA sites are set up, you know, in various communities across the country and across the state. And sometimes they're like, we're a VITA site for senior citizens that live in Chinatown, or we are a VITA site in this neighborhood community we set up in this specific community center for this neighborhood that speaks this specific language, right? Or like there's very niche VITA sites sometimes, and then sometimes there's more general VITA sites that serve the broader community. There's just a range of sites across the state. And the criteria is that you have to learn, have earned under 67,000 or less. But there are not enough VITA sites to go around, right? There's not enough capacity for everyone to visit a VITA site that's eligible. The certified volunteer, they're certified by the IRS. They're trained. Carla just took her training. She gets recertified every year. She's our tax consultant, and she stays up to date by getting trained each year on all the changes that have happened with tax filing. So that's what a VITA volunteer gets trained on. And then they are associated with a specific VITA site. There are, like I said, not enough VITA sites to go around. There are what's called VITA deserts in some regions of the state and obviously of the country. And that was one of the reasons we thought, let's partner with some of our great foster care providers to become foster youth VITA sites, to make sure that we have some added capacity that is, specifically familiar with serving this population. Some VITA sites offer remote assistance. Obviously, that's becoming more and more common post-pandemic world. So that is an option. And then I want to talk a little bit about our VITA roster. So this is one of those things that if you click on that link, and I'll put it in the chat, you will go to a landing page and it will say, the roster is going to be available at the end of January when tax season launches. So this is one of those things you can't yet view the actual roster, but you will be able to soon. We've got to wait till the sites are at least closer to up and running or are up and running to have an accurate list. But this roster lists everything you see on the screen there. So the VITA sites for foster youth, there are 5. They're located in the Bay Area and LA. I know we don't have Central Valley right now, or far north, but there are ways that young people in those regions can be assisted, and I'll get to that in a moment. And there are also, they may not be VITA sites, but there are like centers or programs that do host, self-filing events in partnership with general VITA sites for foster youth. So just because, the Central Valley doesn't have a VITA site for foster youth, there are some organizations that will serve young people that have been in foster care by partnering with a local VITA site. So it shows VITA sites for foster youth. It shows general sites that have been trained on the foster youth tax credit. One new thing we launched this year at JBay was training general VITA sites on the foster youth tax credit and working with foster youth clients. This is such a niche, small population and a not widely known about credit, and it's a new tax credit. So most VITA sites have no idea it exists, and that's part of the problem, right? And so we're trying to get that education out there and that training so that they know it exists, they know how to claim it if a young person comes to them. And so the roster will indicate who's received that training. And then the other thing that roster includes are the sites that are open beyond April. So one thing we've discovered over the course of this project is most sites seem to shut down on that April tax deadline. And if you don't know, that April tax deadline is only a deadline for those who owe taxes. If you don't owe taxes, you have till October to file. That's for everyone. I didn't know that until we started doing this, and I started filing my taxes after April, when I knew I didn't owe. And it was like, I can't believe I never knew this. I mean, it's just not widely known. So it lists all the sites that we've identified that are open beyond April. They all haven't necessarily been trained on the tax credit, but if you're visiting a general site, we recommend that you should bring information about the foster youth tax credit. We have a one-pager for tax preparers to make sure they're aware of it. Lastly, what is shown on the roster is a VITA locator. So the IRS has a VITA locator where you sort of like enter your location, and you know how these things work, and then they populate what sites are around you. There are a lot of sites out there. So the reason there's not a full comprehensive just list of sites, there's a lot of them. But so that's why we have this roster to show you which ones are open beyond April through either June or through October, which ones assist foster youth specifically, and which ones have been trained to claim the foster youth tax credit. So all of that will be there when it is available just in a few weeks here. So let's see, I put the roster in the chat, and now I have something exciting to share. So for those young people who are not located somewhere where there is a foster youth VITA site, or if you can't get an appointment, it's impacted, or for any other reason, one of our fantastic VITA sites here in San Francisco has offered to assist young people statewide virtually. So San Francisco Court-Appointed Special Advocates, or SF CASA, which is a lot easier to say, has been a VITA site for a few years now. They are one of the 5 foster youth VITA sites statewide. They are fantastic. And they are encouraging, if you are, a CASA, I don't know if people are familiar with CASAs. I think some people may be, but these are volunteers that are assigned to some young people. Some young people are matched with CASAs, and they're sort of like a special adult in their life that has, a legal relationship with them. They're court appointed, and they're sort of another advocate and kind of ideally permanent connection in their life that will stay with them through, placement changes and if you're in and, just if your status changes, like the CASA is there. It's not like a social worker that if they leave their job, they go away. So CASAs are really ideally supposed to be a permanent fixture. They're fantastic folks. And not every young person has a CASA, but SF CASA is encouraging those in the CASA network to reach out to them and coordinate tax filing for the young people they serve. And they're also saying, if you don't have a CASA, we can serve you. So we can assist youth directly, regardless of your involvement with CASA. We can assist virtually and in person. So if you're not in the Bay Area, if you're in Fresno, if you're in San Bernardino, they will assist you virtually. And the links on the screen, which I'll put in the Zoom, are how to get in touch with them. And they, the best way to sign up for young people to sign up for an appointment with them is to go to that, that website, that first bullet. And that's also what the QR code on the flyer leads to, and schedule an appointment. And there's information on the flyer about, when they have services available. So really encourage you guys to connect any young people that don't have sort of local resources to, and that maybe don't want to self-file, to SF CASA's site. All right, so self-filing. So let's shift gears a little bit here. Self-filing is super common. It's really important that we help young people self-file correctly if they want to self-file. It's 81% of young people who receive the foster youth tax credit did so by self-filing. Again, myfreetaxes.org, which is essentially the same software that the VITA volunteers use, which is called TaxSlayer, but it's a different version of it, right? It's an online platform that is, you can literally just go online and file your taxes. That is what we encourage people to use. We have a step-by-step guide that will walk you through exactly what to click on and what to do and what to consider as you're filing using myfreetaxes.org. That is one of those things that will be available very soon when tax season launches. We need to be able to pull the screenshots to update it. So it's something that we're sort of, again, doesn't become available till closer to, tax season. Of course, young people can file using TurboTax or whatnot, but unless you get the free version, you are going to pay for these programs. There is a free version of TurboTax. One important thing to know about that free version is if you have 1099 forms, which is what are provided to you if you are self-employed, which includes people who drive for Uber or Uber Eats or Lyft or DoorDash or whatnot, you cannot file for with the free TurboTax software if you have 1099. So that's important to know because a lot of young people do that gig work, right? And then again, the resources for self-filing. Our step-by-step guide there it has screenshot by screenshot and what to click if you file on your own. There's also an interactive training that iFoster created in partnership with us last year. And they have said they will update it for the 2025 tax season. I don't know the date on that, but it should be soon because tax season is launching soon. And so both of those are options. iFosters is more interactive, like youth friendly, like more of a training. Ours is more of just like a visual guide, step-by-step screenshots. So it just really depends kind of on what, you know, what your preference is. Okay, so self-filing is great. But some young people, they might say, I want to self-file, but I think I need a little more support. I don't know that I need to go to a VitaSite and have a one-on-one appointment, but I do want to get a little more support with self-filing. You can hold a tax event on your campus. And I think some of you, I think Gabrielle had scanned the attendees, and some of you have done that already. So you know what I'm talking about here. This is an event where there's two types of events. There's a self-filing event where you literally get a group of students, you put the self-filing guide up on the screen, you have Vita volunteers standing by, right? Maybe one of them is walking step by step through what's on the screen. And if youth get stuck, and they each have their own computer and they're going through and doing this, they get stuck, the Vita volunteer is there to help, right? So it's more efficient than a one-on-one appointment, right? Because you can assist a bunch of young people at the same time, but they do need to be a little more independent, right? They need to be able to do some of this on their own. So there's also a Vita sub-site event, which is sort of a step up from that, right? A Vita site can essentially bring their site to you. And I know Gabrielle also mentioned in the chat that there are often Vita sites on your campuses in some cases. So connect with that site on campus. I don't even know if that'd be called a sub-site event. I think it'd just be going to Vita. But if you have a Vita site in the community, they can send their volunteers to you for a day, and they can essentially take appointments with young people in your space. So that's called a sub-site event. Both are great. And, you know, it really just depends on how much support young people need and what the availability and willingness is of that local Vita site, right? There's a great event that happens every year. Now, I think I can say every year because it's happened 2 years in a row in Riverside. I'm not sure if folks are on the call from this group, but they've been doing a really cool event where they do basically a sub-site event, and it's been really successful. All right, so let's talk about how to do these events, because we really want to make these approachable for you. The first step is you got to identify your local Vita site to partner with. So you can use the Vita roster to identify that site, and they can send volunteers. You would request, you can tell them who you are, what young people, you know, who the population is you're trying to serve, and say, we'd like to partner on a sub-site event or a self-filing event. And then you could also invite other partners. If you feel like you only have a very small number of young people, you can invite another campus near you to partner on this, or a local housing provider. That's what they've done in Riverside, where they've invited their local housing provider to send young people, and they've done sort of a large event that assists a lot of young people in the community, both students and non-students. Outreach is, I mean, if you ask anyone who's done these events, outreach is just so important. All of you know this because you work with young people and you do events, and you know how it is. You're going to get maybe 50% attendance, right? So emailing, texting, calling, flyers, using an RSVP form has been really successful for these events. And then doing it all again. So multiple pinging about these events. It takes a lot to secure attendance. And then consider incentivizing attendance, right? Can you offer gift cards? Could you do a raffle of a gift card if you can't offer it to everyone? Food is a must, right? And you guys know this because you do events with students, but no different here, right? Whatever you do to get them there for your events, apply here. All right, making sure students are prepared will lead to a much more successful event. And I know Carla can vouch for that. She's done many and Cody at many a self-filing event. So here's one way to make sure students are prepared. Host the Taxes 101 workshop, part 1, Taxes 101 workshop, part 2, and then do your self-filing or your sub-site event. Within those workshops, within those trainings, you will have young people review the self-filing guide, and then there's a discussion section of the training that's like, are you prepared? What items are you missing? And then they go out and they identify the items they're missing. It's going to require some one-on-one follow-up. Did you get those items? Let's make sure you have everything you need now. But a good way of avoiding like meeting with every young person one-on-one like 3 different times, right, is to do it in a workshop format. If you can't do a workshop, that's okay. You can grab the tax prep checklist, meet with each young person prior to the event, and review it and help them gather their documents. So whatever you got to do to get to help them, the more prepared they come with documents to the event, the easier it is for them, for you, for the VITA volunteers. And the more likely they are to leave having filed their taxes. We've seen so many times where young people are missing something from their bank or something, and they've got to go back to the VITA site another day and finish filing because they couldn't quite get it done at the event because of that one document. So to avoid that from happening, that upfront prep is key. All right, there's a lot on this slide. You're going to get these slides. You can look at them later. But here's sort of just the overview of running one of these events. We've got self-filing events on the left, and we've got sub-site events on the right. A lot of similarities, but some differences, so wanted to split them up there. I'm realizing as I'm looking at this, Carla told me it should be 3 hours, not 2 hours, and I put 2 hours. So I will change that when I send the slides out. So that timing, one event that everyone attends together, that's a self-filing event. Recommended timing, that is 3 hours, not 2. Sorry about that. For sub-site events, taking appointments is really great idea. Even if you're going to accept drop-ins, which we encourage, having you sign up for appointments helps you, what's the right word, sort of organize the day so that you don't get too many people all at one time. It's sort of like when you have people sign up for workshops at a conference ahead of time and they don't have to attend them, but it gives you, ideas on numbers. And then the length of the event would really be dependent on the availability of the VITA volunteers. I think it's asking them how much time they can give to the event and how many appointments they can take. Space requirements. So, space is good for you. You want everyone who's completing their taxes filing their taxes to have adequate privacy. So one really large room works for both situations, but you do want definitely a separate, for sub-site events, a separate waiting area to ensure that young people aren't disturbed by those that are waiting for their appointment, those that are completing filing their taxes currently. And you just want to make sure you have a designated check-in area also where students are double checking they have their documents and where they can print anything they're missing. You need a projector for sure for that self-filing event, a computer for each student, or in the case of a sub-site event, a computer for each VITA volunteer. And then staffing, this is a recommendation, what's on the screen. Of course, the more staff, the more support you have, the better. And same with VITA volunteers. You can also just ask them what they recommend. That's fine. I'm going to move us along, but again, you will have all this information on the slide when you get it. So I'm going to pass it now to Carla to talk about what happens after youth file and how you can help. And she'll also talk a little bit about some of those financial aid intricacies that I think people have been asking questions about and that have sort of come up throughout the presentation.
Thanks, Simone. So yes, what to do after a young person filed, especially if the foster youth filed and they missed the foster youth tax credit. If the foster youth self-file using an online platform like myfreetaxes.org or TurboTax, and they want support from a VITA site for the amendment, they need to bring a copy of their current tax return along with their tax forms. It is fairly simple to do an amendment using myfreetaxes.org or TurboTax to get the foster youth tax credit. But if a young person's not familiar with the platform, it may take a little bit longer, and therefore having an adult there to support them would be really helpful. And what I've done in the past, because I'm trained on the tax layer through myfreetaxes.org, and I assisted a few young people with an amendment on TurboTax, I Googled it. And so it was helpful to, okay, Googled it, and then I was able to help the young person navigate TurboTax. So it does take a little bit of time. Besides missing the foster youth tax credit, there are other common situations why one should amend a return. You realize you missed out on claiming a tax deduction or credit, like the California renter's credit may have been missed. You accidentally claimed the wrong tax filing status. You needed to add or remove a dependent. You forgot to claim taxable income on your tax return, like a missed W-2. That is something very common. I would sit down with a young person. I'm helping them self-file. They're like, "Oh yeah, well I had this one job, but they haven't sent me their W-2." knowing that, I have to stop the young person right then and there and like, okay, let's get that W-2. So it's really important, like everyone has mentioned here, really going through that tax prep checklist and making sure they have every W-2, even if they worked for that employer for just one day. We need to get that W-2. And then lastly, you realize you claimed an expense deduction or credit that you weren't eligible to claim. So those are common reasons why someone should amend. And as we know, foster youth are vulnerable to identity theft because their personal identifiable information can be accessed by the many adults they encounter during their time in care, including non-custodial family members, foster parents, and social services personnel. So if you have an in-care foster youth, like an NMD, non-minor dependent, and they uncover someone used their identity to file a tax return, they should contact their dependency attorney immediately for assistance. And either that dependency attorney can either support them through that process, or they can maybe get some guidance through outside, legal aid. For aged out foster youth, they can contact their previous dependency attorney and or social worker or probation officer and maybe get a referral for a legal service to support and help them through that process. Next slide. What does tax fraud look like? So here on the slide, we have different ways it can look. Someone used their social security number, their ITIN. The student receives a notice from the IRS about wages they didn't earn or received a W-2 or a 1099 from an employer they don't recognize. While the student is still employed, their employer received a request for information about an unemployment claim in the student's name. So there's many other reasons why, what tax fraud could look like. These are some of the main ones. So how do you remedy this? If their social security number or individualized tax identification was stolen, they can complete the IRS form, the 14039, the identity theft affidavit, and submit the form online or by mail. And if you go to the identitytheft.gov, that's the IRS website, it has all the information on how you can remedy that situation. And if you still don't, and if it's still not resolved after you submit the form, then you can actually call the IRS and they have a 1-800 number for that. And the other thing that's really important, especially if a young person has some identity theft while they are in care, they can create an identity protection PIN. It is a 6-digit number that prevents someone else from filing a tax return using their social security number or their individualized taxpayer identification number. The IP PIN is known only to the tax filer and the IRS, and it helps the IRS to verify their identity when they file electronic or paper return. This is done through creating an ID.me account, which also serves the purpose of being able to locate, like, where is your refund? On the Franchise Tax Board side, there is an online tax fraud referral report they could submit online. They can also mail it in, and the FTB also has a 1-800 number. And I believe Simone mentioned this earlier. So if a young person files as single and the return was rejected due to someone claiming them who should not have claimed them on their tax return, what we do is we go ahead and have the foster youth send in a paper return to the IRS and FTB. Both agencies will likely send a letter to the foster youth requesting additional information, and they will also send a letter to the person who actually claimed them on their taxes, and they'll ask for, and then those two agencies will determine the outcome of the return. Next slide. And so again, I just mentioned that, the IRS or FTB will most likely send a letter asking for more information to determine the outcome of a return. The young person should respond to the letter accordingly, like within the time frame allotted. They may need some help to determine what is being asked. So having an adult there, they can take the letter to, hey, what is this saying? What should I do? So definitely they should, respond accordingly. And again, we've mentioned this many times during this presentation. How can you help them prepare to file their taxes, review that foster youth tax prep checklist? Like I mentioned, the W-2s, even if it was just for one day, they need to get that W-2. By law, an employer has to send it to them by the end of January. But unfortunately, some of our foster youth, they move around a lot. So the foster youth should know, where was your last known address? Maybe you need to call your employer, get that, get them to resend it to you. Some employers do have their employees, they have an account, and sometimes they put that their W-2 in like their employee account. So the other thing is help a young person set up a routine or a plan on saving all of their higher education or self-employment expense receipts. That's really important, helping them, develop a system for that. Okay, and then also spend time going over what are educational expenses, and how can these help reduce their tax liability? And we'll discuss this a little bit more in the next slide. Go ahead. It is important to have students get a copy of their financial aid transcripts along with their 1098-T. A tax preparer will go through the list of grants and scholarships and determine if the student needs to report all or a portion of the scholarships on their tax return. So most likely for the American Opportunity Tax Credit, that is when you're pursuing these are tax-free if they are pursuing a degree at an accredited college or university, and the award doesn't exceed your qualified education expenses such as tuition, fees, books, class supplies, and equipment. This also includes a computer software, or internet access, and related services qualify for the credit. The student needs a computer for attendance at the educational institution. I've also, put in a backpack because the young person needed the backpack to, take their books to class and all their equipment. So, a tax preparer will help the young person go through all of that and determine what is a qualified expense. And they will also work with them on, okay, let's see how we can maximize your return with your grants and scholarships. So again, like we've said in the past, you don't have to be the expert. The VITA tax preparers, they're the ones that can help sift through those grants and scholarships and determine which ones need to be, which ones are tax-free and which ones are not. What is not tax-free?
I don't know if it's just me, but it looks like Carla's frozen. Is that also for others?
Yes.
Amount is taxable, whether or not our lifetime learning credit, course-related books, materials, and supplies are not included as qualified expenses unless paid directly to the institution as a condition of enrollment. And unfortunately, room and board are not qualified expenses, which is really unfortunate for our young people. It is important to note that any scholarship funds left over after paying for qualified education expenses would become taxable income. Again, as I mentioned earlier, a VITA volunteer will work through all of those grants and scholarships, and they'll determine what needs to be reported and what does not need to be reported for, taxable, non-taxable. Let them do that work. Next slide.
Carly, you froze for a little bit, but when you were talking, so I just want to underscore to make sure people got the gist of this.
Sorry.
I mean, you can just see in the table what, on the left, financial aid's tax-free when, on the right, financial aid is not tax-free when, right? So again, we'll send this out and you can see it if you missed what Carla was saying, but the next slide will be sort of a summed up version of what you need to pay attention to when you're assisting students.
And especially just to echo on that, the VITA volunteers, they're trained on how to prepare these taxes. They know the 1098-Ts. They will figure out how to, what's taxable and non-taxable in regards to grant and scholarships. So they will do that work. They will sit there and look through it and, let the young person know, what's a qualified expense, what's not a qualified expense. And they'll go through all of that in their appointments with the young person. So again, so what's the bottom line here? Young people should spend their financial aid wisely. Keep receipts of all their educational expenses. If their financial aid exceeds their qualified expenses, they may owe, so maybe put some money aside for tax time. Financial aid for a certificate program is taxable. Next slide. So we are nearing the end of the presentation today. So in the beginning, we had you rate yourselves from 0 to 10. Where are you at now feeling, how do you feel about helping a young person file their taxes? So are we going to launch another poll, Simone? So Simone will launch the poll. So hopefully if you were like a 2 or 3 in the beginning, we hope you went up a step, like a 4 or a 5. And again, you're not alone. JBay has a lot of materials that will help you support your young people file their taxes. So the poll has launched. Where are we at, Simone?
All right, I'll end the poll now. We're definitely, I'll share the results here. We are definitely further along. So I'm glad to see that. A lot of people have moved into there's a lot of 6, 7, 8s now. So that's exciting. And I think, this is a whirlwind of information. Again, you don't have to know all of this, really well, but it's knowing how to assist young people. So knowing that with financial aid, keep the receipts, spend your financial aid on qualified expenses. Know that certificate programs, financial aid for certificate programs is taxable. And then sort of how to refer people to resources in the community, how to host resourceful events in your space. These are all things that we hope that you come away with, and we're here to answer questions if if you have questions about what you learned today. Let's move now into Q&A. And if you haven't got a chance to enter any questions into the chat or into the questions box, excuse me, please do so now. I'll start off by reading a few questions out and I'll pitch them to folks. I have me and Cody's contact information here. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. We can also connect you with Gabrielle and Carla if that is necessary. Let's start off with this question. The first question was something we just talked about. So Carla, I will shoot it to you. Would financial aid not used for tuition or education expenses count toward income? So let's just reiterate this one, right?
Yes, it can. But again, as earlier, bringing in that financial aid transcript is really important. So then the VITA volunteer can look at the scholarships and grants because they have to sort of comb through them. And that's what we've learned, for maybe VITA volunteer now in my 4th year is looking through those grants and scholarships, look at what they are. They specifically tell you what those are for. And then lines, the VITA volunteer, they will work with the young person and they will try to maximize the credit for them. So, we're all trained to do this. And so, yeah, so it could, but and these are the situations that you may want to refer a young person for a one-on-one appointment, especially if they get a lot of grants and scholarships. So then a VITA volunteer can sift through those and help to maximize the American Opportunity credit for that young person. And that's especially if they're going for a 4-year a degree program.
And
like a
then I
bachelor's.
wanted to add on to that as just a recommendation from being a student at 2 different colleges. I was definitely one of those students where I don't need the supplies. Like I can utilize what I have. And then I dealt with the consequences later on. So if you have students, definitely encourage them if they're able to use that money on school supplies. Like if their computer is having issues, Tell them to buy a laptop. Tell them to buy the supplies that they need. If they need ink for their printer, any expenses like that, because a lot of students, they have online classes as well, and that requires you to have a computer and a printer sometimes, and supplies at your house and all of that. So definitely encourage your students to buy the supplies that they may think they don't need, but they could benefit from in their classes. And then I also wanted to make a note. There are some cases where they will not be issued a 1098T form. I've run across some college campuses websites when I was a VITA volunteer where it's specified on their website that if they received a specific grant, they would not issue a 1098T. So you may run into that situation as well. So if the student doesn't have one, don't panic. They just may be in that case where they're not going to be issued one. But yeah, I just wanted to share that as well.
Yeah, and I've ran into that as well as Cody. There's some community colleges that don't issue the 1098Ts. And then there was a question regarding how do I become a VITA volunteer? So you take a test, but luckily you
Here.
get trained. You go through a training, and then
Carla,
yes.
something's going on with your connectivity where you're in and out. I don't know if I don't think you're hearing us.
Actually, that was you this time, Simone.
Oh, it was me. Look, I'm blaming Carla.
But we can hear you now. You're
Okay.
moving.
Yeah.
I'll mute.
Okay.
Go ahead, Carla.
Okay. So again, how do you become a volunteer? So first I should say you
This time it's Carla.
Yes.
All right. Well,
provide you with training, so it's not new. You know, it's not it. Hopefully, it's not a scary opportunity. My internet connection is a little
Yeah.
unstable, so I'm going to turn off my video. So you go to the local VITA site in your community, ask what training they have available, and then you take a test. There's a basic and an advanced, and it's an open book test. So there is a guide. It's the 4012. I call it the VITA Volunteer Bible. Once you do the training and then you take the test, you could use that 4012 to go along and help you answer the questions. And you have 2 times to answer the questions. And then you get your certificate. And there's a couple other little like 10 question tests on ethics and code of conduct. And then I can't remember the other one. Cody, you may want to chime in. There's another one. So there's basically 3 tests that you have to take, but then you become a VITA volunteer. So it does take a little bit of time with the training, but and the test, there's a practice lab where you get examples, and then you have to put it into the TaxSlayer program, and then you answer the question. So it's a little bit of a process, but it's actually, I enjoy it. Never thought I was going to be a tax preparer, but I like it. So it's a lot of fun, especially engaging with the young person as you're doing the tax return. I use those as teaching moments. If they get a return, hey, what are you going to do with this? Help them have that conversation of, maybe saving it, pay off some debt. So I have that sort of financial literacy discussion with them, along with I'm showing actually the young person of like how to file, because at some point we want them to learn how to do this on their own. So I take extra time to go through and really walk them through the process.
And the nice part about VITA volunteering is there's basic and advanced. So if this is your first time doing VITA volunteering work, if you kind of want to learn the ropes, you can start out with basic. So you'll just do very simple tax returns. This can include financial aid, W-2s, Going into advanced is where it's 1098, where it gets a little bit more complicated. But so if you just want to, like, if there's your first time, you want to dip your toes, see how you like it, you have an option where if you go into it, you do not have to know every single situation. You will be trained on basic or advanced, whatever your preference is. That was one thing that I really enjoyed. I have personal experience. I'm a contractor myself, so I received a lot of 1099s, but I stuck with basic because doing it for myself versus doing it for someone else is very different. So I did not want to, I'm not an expert. So I left that to those who had more experience under their belts. So I had done basic returns and felt very confident in that.
Thank you. I want
And-
to tackle, oh, sorry, go ahead, Gabrielle.
Yeah, I just want to chime in that although it's wonderful to become a certified official VITA volunteer, that is by no means necessary to help students. All the information and materials that JBay and other organizations have put together, it really is enough to help your students learn how to file their taxes and do so successfully. So like I said, awesome if you go over and above, but you can be a total layperson who needs a calculator to do basic math like me and still help people.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for someone who wants to like give back to the community on a bigger level and or has some free time on their hands, right? But it's certainly it's definitely not the strategy to help your students. I don't think that that's like Gabrielle's saying. But if you do want to do it and you want to assist foster youth specifically, reach out to us because we'll connect you with one of the foster youth VITA sites, and you could be a virtual volunteer if you're not local to them. So just last thing about that. I do want to pivot before we jump off here because someone asked about verification for the foster youth tax credit. And this is something we didn't really cover because, again, you guys aren't VITA volunteers, right? And so unless you're helping someone with self-filing where you need to, where you're going through the self-filing guide with them, it's not something you'll necessarily come across, but you may have to help someone advise them on this. So it's good to know. For the foster youth tax credit, you don't have to submit a dependency letter, right? That verification letter that I know many of you are familiar with, but it's a good practice. Now, the way it works is there is an option to upload a verification letter or a dependency letter, whatever you call it in your community, when you're filing your taxes to upload it. And that provides a backup method for verification. What will happen for young people who claim the credit is the California Department of Social Services and the California Franchise Tax Board will figure out if you're eligible, but they have what they call a pinging system where they'll verify whether you're eligible. If that system somehow fails, they will send you a letter and say, we need verification, or not you, they'll send the student a letter saying, we need verification. And then that student, like Carla mentioned, needs to respond to the letter in a timely fashion and provide their verification letter. But and that's not happening frequently, but I would say if I was filing my taxes and claiming this credit and I could get my verification letter, I'd do it because why not, right? Why not just have the backup there? So if a young person has that letter, go ahead and upload it. There's certainly no reason to not claim the credit if you don't have the letter. You don't have to have that letter. So I just wanted to make that statement because I do think it's important if that comes up.
And also to piggyback on that, Simone, that if the young person aged out of foster care, they need to use the exact name that they had while they're in care. If their
Yes.
name changed, there is a place in TaxSlayer on that foster youth tax credit page. They can indicate what was their name while they were in care. So if they got married, they need to provide their name exactly how it was in foster care to the exact spelling.
Like their government name.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, so that's really important to let those young people know that, sometimes our young people will change, they had a Y, but they want to put an I on their name. They do that, not going through the court process. So definitely they need to put it exactly how it was when they were in care.
Yes, I will close with a statement someone sent in through the chat, and they said, they were talking about the VITA subsite event or a self-filing event, and they said this worked great for our rural community college. The VITA site came for 3 different days. So I want to end on that note. They had a great experience. We encourage all of you to do any of the things suggested in this webinar. We will send the information out later today. I want to thank all of you for attending and thank our 3 wonderful panelists who joined us today. Thanks, everyone.